You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is director Tylor Norwood. And we're going to be discussing his new documentary entitled Fireline. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. This is a really riveting documentary about the front lines of our firefighters who are battling a horrific fire here in California. Let's just so our audience knows a little bit about Fireline. Why don't you give us the synopsis of the film?
Sure. So it's a film about an elemental force, right? These like California wildfires, but these wildfires that are generally sweeping the world in terms of like climate change is a driving factor. And so there's this whole cohort of humans who spend almost their entire year fighting these fires, or the extreme weather that's generated from fires. So you have flooding and landslides and all sorts of other things. But this film focuses on these three guys basically who spend their summers, winters chasing fire up and down the state of California. And there's about 100,000 men and women who are employed in the fire service and first responder units that basically what they do most of the year is track wildfires up and down the state of California. So I was interested in that story. Like, who are these people? What is their what are their lives like? We had a really powerful event in San Francisco where I live, where the sky went orange in the middle of the day and you couldn't see the sun, and I was like, wow, this is horrible. But I thought, there's somebody out at the far edge of what I can even, wherever this is, there's people out there who are having to fight this fire that, like, the smoke is so bad that 100 200 miles away I can't see the sun.
Right.
So I was interested in who those people were, what their stories were, and I found something really compelling in terms of a really powerful, like, lived story, like a human story about putting your life on the line, being in a position where you have to sort of submit to something so much bigger and so much more powerful than what we can stop. Because that's the thing, is you have this huge amount of people who are working towards stopping these things, but they have very little control. Actually, all they can do is hope to sort of curtail it or push it one way or the other. But there's no coming in and putting water on and it goes away. When a fire gets going at the scale of these fires that we see every year across the West and across the world, they burn, and they burn hot, and they burn until they're done burning. There's very little that humans can do. So I thought it was an interesting place to put a camera.
It is an interesting place. I remember, well, that fire, the one, I think it's this one, right? We're talking about, I lived in Carmel by the Sea, and the
Mm.
same, we had, so I'm a couple hours south of San Francisco, and I have pictures of what it looked like. And I think this happened in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And we were all thinking it was the end of the world anyway, because of the pandemic. And when this happened, and I, took pictures and posted them, and I had my surrogate daughter and her children were driving through this fire up to Washington State, and the stories that she shared with me, I mean, three young children, an infant, and two boys who were under 5 when this took place, was just amazing that she even made it through. So it is an interesting place to put a camera. How did you get access, though, and why? And then we'll also, like, follow-up question is why these three firefighters that you followed?
Oh, it's a great question. So that's something that I spend a lot of energy on in the films that I make, is getting really unique access. Because I found that that's actually, rather than just running out and chasing a story, the most important thing is to sort of visualize, like, where would the story happen and how do you get a camera there? Because if you start from that situation, you actually end up doing a lot of meetings, a lot of like emailing, right? Because you essentially have to like work this permission set. And what we did is we started with basically the governor's office and Cal Fire and the union that represents firefighters in the state of California. And once we started getting kind of those big check marks, then everything else sort of fell into place. And then the reason it was the three gentlemen in the film is because we did a bunch of like fishing. Like, basically, we didn't know how the fire service works. It's much akin to the military in terms of the scope and scale of it. It's a massive operation. And so to know, even with experts at the top telling us, hey, you should put a camera here, we would get there, and then there would be like 30 teams running different missions. And we were like, well, which of these missions is the best mission to film? And they'd say, we don't know. And so that there was a whole summer of us going out on these things. And sometimes it was just guys basically like checking homes to make sure everybody was out and they weren't really that close to the front of the fire. And then there was other times where the fire had just passed through and they were cleaning up. And so there was all this, so it took us a while to figure out like how we get the best missions to follow. And we got lucky with this one where it was actually very uncharacteristic. The mission that we follow, it's similar in the way it ends, which is these guys at the front of the fire trying to put something out. But the way that it builds to that moment is really unique in terms of us getting access to the fire incident command base, which is like straight out of like a military film. You have these guys looking at a giant map and they have the big stick and they're pointing and they're like, you men will go here and this is the front line. And it was that part of it was very special and unique that the film ever even caught it on camera, because those moments kind of come and go so quick that like unless we were there, we would have never been able to have filmed it. And I don't think anyone else had ever filmed it. We've heard some people in the fire service say there's things in this film that they didn't like, they'd heard about but never even knew were possible. So that's something that in terms of access that I think we did really well on.
Yes, you did. And it did seem like the military. No question. When I was watching it, I was thinking that. Exactly. Well, I think you would have to be because it's a battle. You're battling this fire. It's like going into a war zone. It really is, probably even worse than a war zone in some ways. And you would have to be very militaristic about how you would approach this fire and how you would battle it. Um, so how dangerous did it get for you and your crew? And how many people did you have on your crew?
Yeah, I just want to say something real quick because I think you have a great intuition for this idea that I've used the context in a few interviews that it's like a battle because that's how they think of it, and they kind of use military terms to structure the whole system. But it is actually interesting to think that the other side's not fighting fair. Like fire does whatever it wants. There's no code of conduct. There's no rules. It's like it does whatever it wants, and so that actually causes quite a few like disjointed interactions between where these guys are headed towards the front line, but actually what's coming at them is nothing like an enemy. It's just this massive thing.
And there's
And
no
so
ceasefire.
there's no ceasefire, right? Like it does what it wants. And so that was
Yeah.
actually an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. They think about it. The entire thing is structured like military, but the other side isn't someone you can reason with. It's
Right.
coming at you and it's doing what it wants. That's really interesting. Sorry, then your question was about the people on the fire. Oh, some of the dangerous situations we were in.
Right.
So I sort of naively just got into this thing, and it's something you'll actually see if you're ever around firefighters. There's just something about them, like these guys were actually a bit junior to me, like a little younger, but still there was something about the way they carried themselves, their composure, that like I just felt safe. And so no matter where they
Mm.
went, I was like, hey, if they're not running, I'm okay. And even at the point of the film where there's like a 200-foot high wall of flame like barreling towards them with these things called fire tornadoes, which are like 2000-degree like tornadoes just ripping through like thick trees, like kind of burning them in very short order. I was just locked in on these guys who were witnessing this thing, and you have this moment where it's kind of quiet. There's just wind noise because the fire creates this like suction and then like blowing. And so they're just kind of watching these trees kind of get pulled left and right, and they're watching the fire come at them. And they're like kind of they're highly aware of what's happening, and they're very like attenuated to the situation, but they're also just in awe. They're also just in like blanket awe, which I thought was a really cool place to film. And it wasn't until we got in the edit room that my editor was like, Tyler, get in here. You got to see this scene that I just cut. And I came and I watched it and I was like, that's terrifying. Oh my God. And there he was like, you shot that though. And I was like, yeah, I get that. At the time, I was just so locked into the firefighters and what they were seeing that I wasn't really thinking about what was happening around us. And it was, yeah. So there wasn't any like danger felt, but like in watching it all later on, I was like, oh yeah, like there's no safety out there. Like there's no safety net again, right?
Well, I mean, I guess the adrenaline was flowing through you and your crew so much. You probably just, when that happens, you don't always feel the danger that you're really in. I mean, that's what you
Yeah.
say, when you're in those kind of life and death situations, that your adrenaline's going, you don't have time to really process. Oops, sorry, process what's going on. So that's probably what was going on for you and your crew. How many people did you have on your crew?
Yeah, that's a great point. So it was me, my producer Ben Sinclair, Jake, oh my gosh. We could just Jake. But then Justin White, who was our assistant on the project, and then we had a couple support people back home. But when we were out in the field, it was me, Ben, and Jake and Justin. And Jake had his own team that he was following and did an amazing job of kind of sticking with those guys separate from me. So we were sort of put in two vehicles on two different teams, and they kind of went out and did their own mission. And so it wasn't until like kind of an IHOP the next morning, like 36 hours later after we'd separated, that we were like, did you get good stuff? And he was like, I think I got great stuff. But it was like we both sort of had been in these situations that I think very few people will ever find themselves in. And I'll always feel more connected when I see a wildfire, when I see a firefighter who I know has been in these situations, that you have like just so much more of a respect for the world and the commitment that they make. I think that was something that I was really interested in, was like, what are they, maybe I'm not fully accounting for what it is that these men and women give. And I think now I have a really good sense of it. And I think the great thing is that an audience can get that too from watching this film, is to go, wow, like that's what these people are giving. That's what they're signing up for.
Yes, yes, and it does. It gives you that bird's eye view that we would never be able to see before. Yeah, I'm going to go backtrack a little bit because how long did it take you to actually get permission? Because these fires, were going on to start this filming. I mean, was it really close, or did you have to work over a long period of time in order to get the permission to actually shoot this documentary?
Yeah. So my producer and I, Ben, were at his place in Culver City, and we were thinking, we just finished a really interesting project, and we were thinking like, what's the next thing we want to do? And he was like, well, these fires are really crazy. And then we had this conversation about that fire that you and I both had experienced.
Mhm.
And I said, what would it take? And so we got a couple of phone calls over the course of like 2 days, 3 days. We wrote an email. I'd done a film for HBO called Toxic Hot Seat, which was also about firefighters, but not like it was more about rare cancers that they get. So we weren't necessarily going into burning buildings with them, but it was about an issue that they faced. Sort of like a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington thing of them saying, hey, we're getting damaged and we need to. So I had this kind of relationship with a couple people higher up in the fire service. And so when my friend, producer Ben, came up with this idea, I said, oh, I have somebody I can get in touch with. And it's this guy, Tony Stefani, who's like really big in the firefighting scene and in the world. Like he's kind of fairly senior. And so he was able to get me kind of quickly in touch with some people who could at least give me a, yes, this is possible. No, it's not possible. Please stay away from us. And they were interested in the idea. And so I would say probably over the course of like 2 weeks, we were able to like really get a foot in and say, okay, like we want to do this. We have support. And then I would say it probably took another 2.5 months to like get to the point where we could actually like start going out and being a part of these things. Because something I was really intent about, again, in terms of relaying the story that these men and women go through, is like being with them, like truly with them, the way that you and I are talking now with sort of like an openness. I didn't want them to be official. I didn't want to film it from 10 feet away and have them pointing at like, and there's the fire, it's coming at 6 degrees from the west. And like, I wanted to be in it with these like humans who are asked to do this work. And I didn't know what it would take to get that, but I knew we'd at least have to be in the fire engine. We couldn't just be like kind of driving around, like doing little stop and pops and like seeing people come and go. Like we had to be in it for a long period of time so that you kind of get that thing where they start trusting you. And
Mhm.
it took a while for both me and Jake to get the teams to trust us on a 36-hour shift. I think it took the first 12 hours before they started actually like being themselves. But like once you get a little sleep deprived and it's like 3 a.m. and you've got another 24 hours coming up, everybody's kind of in the same team. And that was the thing that I think also was really special about this film, and that I think for years I'll look back on as a really special thing we were able to achieve, which is that they're human. Like you really get the sense that, Justin, who's in the driver's seat, is like 24, 25. Riley in the passenger seat's like 22, and Travis in the back is 19. And they're like, they're kids in that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they're facing this thing that like is reserved for like the most sort of bravery that we can sort of muster, is to sort of like achieve fighting a fire that's 200 feet high and coming fast.
It's interesting. No, I'm assuming was this 2020 that
This was 2021, I think.
2021. Okay, because we've had, there was more fires than certain years than others. So at least you were prepared in case, but there were a lot of fires going on. I mean, we
Sure.
did feel in the state of California, as I said, I lived in Carmel by the Sea. Now I live in Santa Barbara, which has also had quite a few wildfires, and I've met numerous people since I moved here who lost their homes in some of the
Mm.
fires. So, it's everybody here is like, on pins and needles when we get these high winds because that the Santa Ana winds and these high winds, because then it's a high wind alert. And then they go, okay, this is the time when we could have a wildfire,
I
so
had an amazing story of being in Southern California because there's different kinds of fires in California because it's such a big state. So in the
right,
north, it's timber fires that
right.
they burn a little slower, but they're burning like rocket hot, right? Like because these trees are giving them so much energy to burn. The other kind of fire that we have is the Southern California fire that you're mentioning, is which these Santa Ana winds get going and they're blowing these embers. And so if the wind is moving at 70 miles an hour, it's blowing the embers at 70 miles an hour. And so the fire in essence is working at 70 miles an hour. And so I remember this time I was on the freeway, like on the 210 or some kind of thing in Southern California. And I was looking at this ridge and there was a fire and we were driving like at highway speed. And I looked over and the fire was like tracking with the car. And I was like, that fire is moving 70 miles an hour. And it was like, just the reality of that. And how do you stop that? How do you even begin to think you're going to contain it? Like, yeah.
How do they? I mean, it's amazing that they can do what they
Yeah,
do.
that's
I
part
mean,
two of this one if we ever wanted to go there. But it's an incredible, and the thing is that the same firefighters who fight the big timber fires up in the north are the same ones who fight those up fires in the south, because CAL FIRE is one of the main agencies doing that work, and they're going up and down the state all year long. Basically, the early summer stuff starts in the north, and then towards the winter, you get the fires in Southern California. So they can be actually fighting fire for 6 months, 7 months at a time.
well, we had that big fire, and I think towards the end of 2017 here, and
Mm.
then we had heavy rains in January, and we had those huge mudslides in Montecito where 22 people died. They still haven't found some of those bodies, unfortunately. That was devastating on top of it. You have the fire that's taken away, everything. And then it shut down the highway and everything else. It was before I moved here, but, I hear those stories and the videos and everything else. So it's not
Absolutely.
just the fire, it's the aftermath of the fire
Yeah.
too.
Well, so during the summer that we were filming this, so the big fire we were filming was called the Dixie Fire. But then
Hmm.
as that thing was burning and it was up to 1 million acres, right? Which like unbelievable.
Can't even fathom, right?
Another fire started in Tahoe called the Caldor Fire. And that fire was actually coming into a very populated area of like Lake Tahoe, like the actual, like, those beautiful homes and that
Right.
whole thing, like the casinos and all. And so that they kind of pulled some resources from this other fire, which was, it wasn't fully under control, but they had to try and protect more people. Like you have to kind of have this cascading set of like things that we need to do. And if humans are in danger, we have to pull from here and fight here, even though this is still spreading. And one of the things that happened in that fire that they were really worried about is they said, well, if it burns, even if it doesn't get to the people, if it burns this ridge line, when it snows and that snow melt starts, that's all going to cascade, like mudslide down into that area anyway. And
Right.
so just to like, and another really interesting thing is we have this guy, Mark Giarducci, in the film. And he's the head of this agency called the Office of Emergency Services, which I'd never heard of before.
Hmm.
But I liken it to, I don't know if you ever saw Pulp Fiction,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
Harvey Keitel's character, the Wolf, right? Like he's this guy that, when gangsters things go wrong, they call the Wolf, and he comes swooping in with his 3-piece suit on, and he says, "You do this, you do that, and we're gonna get out of here." And that's what Mark Iorducci does. A giant fire pops off, an incredible, like huge earthquake, whatever it is. This Office of Emergency Services assumes the powers of the governor's office fully, so he has the complete power and authority of the governor himself. And then he goes into these situations and says, "You do this, you do that," over the top of like FEMA, fire, police, right? Like he orchestrates these things. And that was another thing that this film does that had never been done before. He'd never allowed cameras into the building of the OES. It's basically like the CIA of California. It's like this
Wow.
incredible other world where you have another list of people who are public servants, and that I never even knew existed. And their entire purpose is to snap into action when there's a flood, a fire, like anything. Even during COVID, Mark was sort of offhandedly telling me that he was the one that arranged the PPE equipment for our medical workers from China. So like we came up with our own system separate and apart from the federal government. And he said he wrote a check himself for $1 billion. And I was like,
What?
wow. crazy. Like just the guy's life is insane. He's actually just freshly retired, and I'm trying to find something I can do with him because I think he's just endlessly fascinating. He was involved in the Oklahoma City bombing. That was like the first thing that he was able to like come in and have to put it all together. The Fukushima, like the big nuclear disaster. So the idea that this guy, just before he retired, a lifetime of service, he served 5 governors over California's history, right? Like it was a cool document just to see how this operation works. That again, I didn't even know about going into this process. I was like, I wanted to get in the fire engine with some firefighters, but like getting to see this kind of like tapestry of like top to bottom, what it takes to make this whole system work. That part was really thrilling.
I can imagine. I would love to see the documentary about this gentleman. It sounds like he has had a fascinating life, and hopefully there's lots of footage of those events that he was involved in. So that might make a really there's your next documentary for you there,
Well,
Tyler.
he has a cool moment in this one, which I thought was interesting, which is that you have there's this moment where you may remember, which is like, so Justin is they're out at the front of this fire and they're setting up and they're getting ready and the fire's coming and they're like, we can protect this house. We want to protect this little house at the front of this thing. And the other guy, Travis, the young one, he's 19 at the time. And the previous summer, he'd seen some really rough stuff for an 18-year-old. And so he was like, I don't think we're safe. Like, let's get out of here. And Justin's like, no, we're safe. And then some kind of authority comes over and says, hey, I think you guys need to get out of here. And Travis is very quick to say, yeah, he said, we got to go. And so they leave, but Justin the whole time is kind of like pounding his fists, like we were fine. We need to go back. And, and so you get this thing where they go back down to the highway where there's a little bit of support and they're not quite in like the anything can happen area. And so Travis is sort of breathing softer. And then, but Justin gets on his personal cell phone and starts calling other guys in the area saying, we were fine right there. Like, can we get somebody to tell us we can go back? And like, so Travis is sort of like wiping his face going, I don't want to go back. Like we just got out of there. And we flash to this sort of thing, which I thought was really important to talk about, which is this slideshow, which is what the firefighters call this sort of things that they see that accumulate over the years of service, like kind of bad things, like, car accidents and whatever it is. But for these guys, they've seen so much stuff. And one of the things is that Travis saw this person get burned, and he was talking about how you're not supposed to see that when you're 18.
Right.
And then the cool thing is it transitions to Mark at the OES talking about all of the things that he's had to see and to send people into these situations and knowing that like if something happens to them, it's on him. Like that's his call that they should go there. They should be on that mission. And that part is a really cool way to just get an overview of the way that these things, there's no amount of bravery that gets you out a lot, like clean, this stuff accumulates and it's difficult and it stays with you.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, seeing someone burned to death, I think that would be something you would never ever get over, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's no bravery that solves for that, right? And
No.
that I think was that human piece that I was really interested in, is getting past the veneer of sort of duty, right? Like that someone has to rise to that occasion every
Right.
time there's a call. And I think that all these guys do that really well.
They do. They do. Again, no, how did you pick these three and
So
why?
we were fishing. I called it fishing. We went out on probably 15 different missions that were like, just you're sleeping in the dirt, it's overnight, and then like nothing's really happening. And so there was sometimes after like 12 hours, I was able to say like, get us out of here. Like nothing filmable is happening.
Mhm.
But there was a couple times where we saw really cool stuff. And there was a couple times it was just important for us to be there and just learn and kind of get uh, the meter of their life, right? Like the
Mhm.
music of the way that it is that they structure their day and how it is that they think about like what they're doing now and what's coming up. And like, that was actually really helpful for when we did finally like catch something, which was like to be out on this mission for this 36 hours with these guys. That then we actually understood them better. I think if they would have been the first thing we would have filmed, I think it probably would have not gone as well. But I think because we knew what was ahead of us for the most part in terms of the way that they speak to one another, the way that they relate to one another, the amount of time they spend in a tiny little area, sort of like picking at each other, like it's just like roommates, right? But you're in a
Right.
you're in a
Right.
room that's like 8 feet by 4 feet or something, and there's three of you, and so it's like they kind of get on each other's nerves, but then there's like that brotherhood piece that comes into it, and so that part of it felt really cool. It kind of felt like there's a David Ayer film called Fury, where like they're in a tank together, and it's Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf, and they're and there's it's sort of like this like little tiny world, and everything outside of that is chaos, and that felt very applicable to what these guys go through.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Fireline is something everyone should see because almost everyone is affected by wildfires, because of climate change all over the country now. It's not just, I mean, California for sure, but certainly everywhere else. And it's a really fascinating documentary, Tyler. It really is. Where can people see Fireline?
They can see it anywhere that they get their films, so it's video on demand in iTunes, Amazon Prime, and all the other ones.
Great. Well, everybody go search out Fireline. Thank you, Tyler, for being on the show.
Thank
Have
you,
a
Jane.
great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.